Dr. Valerie Curtis, the director of the Hygiene Center at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, is visiting the USAID WASH project today, and she's here to talk about her theory of disgust, which is the basis of her book, Don't Look, Don't Touch, Don't Eat, The Science Behind Revulsion. And we'll just make a short plug here, and you can get this book on Amazon or maybe your local bookseller. Could we start out a little today, Val, and talk about your ideas of disgust, which, when one reads the book, they're certainly very compelling, and they generate a very strong and visceral reaction. So could you tell us how you got interested in this topic and why you decided to focus on disgust instead of perhaps other emotional drivers?
Right. I mean, some people call disgust the shadow emotion because it's a kind of dirty, nasty area that psychologists really haven't spent much time looking into. I just got fascinated by it from the work I was doing on hygiene. I was traveling to many different countries and trying to understand why people were washing their hands, or rather why people weren't washing their hands. And so many mums said to me, well, you know, I will wash my hands when they're yucky, when they're sticky, when they're smelly, when they're nasty. And then I said, well, why? Why does it matter to you when your hands are sticky and messy? And they go, well, it's just yuck. And I said, but why does yuck matter? And they couldn't really explain. It seemed to be something so fundamental and visceral that it didn't seem to have a logic to it. So I spent a long time then collecting everything that was disgusting from in lots of different countries, started to systematically study it. Got a motley collection of things, like some people said mushrooms, some people said worms, some people said body fluids, poo, some people said politicians and exploitation. So it was a puzzle, and I love puzzles. So one day someone asked me to talk about to some advice about some rare tropical disease, and I looked it up in the back of this textbook on tropical diseases. And as I was looking it up, I suddenly realized in the index, all of these things that people found disgusting were actually there in the index. So people said fallen hairs were disgusting. Well, fallen hairs actually can actually transmit ringworm. Vomit is disgusting. It can transmit 30 or 40 different infectious diseases. Bodily fluids, the same. The insects and animals that we find disgusting, bats and rats, actually transmit disease as well. So it seemed like it was just too obvious an explanation, really, that infectious, that everything that might cause infection would be disgusting. And there's a good reason for that, because, you know, if your ancestors liked eating poo, for example, or drinking urine, or they wouldn't have been very successful as ancestors. They wouldn't have had so many. Their children would have got sick. They wouldn't have mated so easily, because you know, who wants to mate with a disgusting person? So it seems that all of our ancestors must have been squeamish, and that's the reason why we're squeamish. So you know, people who had ancestors who weren't, who liked eating disgusting things, they would have died out. But we're still here and that's why we have disgust in our brains. So it's the voices of our ancestors telling us, don't look, don't touch, don't eat, stay away from things that might make you sick.
I was just wondering, in light of the current Ebola crisis, has this given you any new insight into your theory of disgust and how that might be applied?
Well, there's two basic emotions in play in Ebola at the moment. Clearly, there's been two massive overreactions, and that's normal in human evolution as well. Humans work on the precautionary principle that, you know, it's okay to miss your dinner, but so you know, if there's some food that looks a bit off, you're not going to die if you miss one meal, but if you do eat it, you might die. So people are overcautious about the signs of infection. So if somebody said to me that you had an infectious disease, I wouldn't want to sit next to you, even if I told you you couldn't transmit it to me, I would still feel uncomfortable about sitting next to you. So there's this instinctual, oh my God, somebody's got an infection, and that's created this. That's part of the reason why there's been a massive social panic. I suspect in the end we're going to find that Ebola isn't as infectious as people think it is, and we will learn to live with it. But then there's the second ancient emotion that's kicked in as well, which is fear. And that's created this panic of sort of headless chickens, everybody running around, nobody being able to sit down and concentrate long enough to actually come up with proper strategies to deal with Ebola. So that's a bit worrying. And I think, every time, we should learn from this. Every time there is one of these panics, we kind of all overreact and all go into emergency mode. And then part of the stuff I talk about in the book is about animals. So actually, humans are just one animal, and all animals have these infection avoidance behaviors. So even a C. elegans worm, which is like 1 millimeter long, it can avoid infections, which is, if you like, as disgust in a worm. So ants are social animals like us, and I was talking to an ant biologist who came to talk to us about disease avoidance in ants, and she said, well, the whole colony is so connected that if there's a breach of the defenses of the colony by a parasite, by an infection, the whole colony can die out. And I was thinking, but that's humans too. We are so interconnected now. Our world is like an ant colony where we're hyper-connected. And if we let an infection in at our boundaries, it can damage the whole species, which is why it's a whole species issue, that we don't allow countries like Sierra Leone and Liberia to have such terrible healthcare conditions that the diseases can enter the human species. That's taught me that it's a problem for our whole species, and we should all be working together and not allow these things to happen, because it's not necessary and we don't have to. Ebola shouldn't ever have happened. It shouldn't be the disaster that it is at the moment.
Now, WASHplus is an implementer of water and sanitation programs. So could you talk a little bit about how programs such as WASHplus can take your theory and apply it to public health programs?
So, human behavior is at the heart of so many public health programs. We so often we know what to do. We know oral rehydration can prevent diarrhea deaths, but only 30% of kids who have got a diarrhea episode use oral rehydration. We know exclusive breastfeeding is important. We know sanitation is important, but people aren't using it. And everybody, pretty much in all of our studies, knows that washing your hands with soap can save perhaps half of all diarrhea illnesses and prevent many, many other infections, but people still aren't doing it. So it's not about knowledge. We've got to find another way of getting people to change their behavior. Knowledge does not mean behavior. Well, disgust is one of the basic emotions that we can call on to help get people to change their behavior. So if I can say to you, you silly woman, wash your hands with soap. If you don't, your children will die. And you'll go, oh, that's a terrible message. And anyway, I've heard it all before. And anyway, how dare you say that to me about my poor hygiene? But if instead I show you a demonstration that shows you that actually there is something disgusting on your hands, or I make an advert that suggests that maybe when you come out of the toilet your hands are still have got some invisible contamination on them, and that can get into your kids' food, and then you think about, oh, eating that food. So if I say to you, Orlando, did you wash your hands after you went to the toilet? Will you shake my hand? And I refuse to shake your hand, and I go, ugh, Orlando, you're disgusting. That's a really powerful, it make you feel ashamed that you hadn't washed your hands. So we have to use it carefully, of course, but we've shown in some of our research that if you use disgust, you can get hand washing behavior to change dramatically. And of course, the CLTS approach in sanitation draws very heavily on disgust. It uses little demonstrations of how the water has possibly got feces in it that people are drinking, and the community comes together with this sort of shared expression of disgust about feces in their community, and that's very important in triggering sanitation behaviors. So disgust's a powerful emotion that we can hype it up, we can use it, and it works. You can improve hygiene behaviors.
I wanted to ask you, since you also have worked a lot on habits, and how do we move away from just generating a practice into making, for example, hygiene habitual? Do you have any thoughts about that issue?
Yeah, what we really want in the end is to have mindless behavior. We're also used to talking cognitively and giving logical, rational arguments, and we kind of assume that people make decisions every day about what they do, but in fact something as simple as hand washing, like toothbrushing, like getting dressed in the morning, like putting your ticket into the ticket machine, those are completely habitual behaviors. They don't require any conscious thought. How do we make those habitual? One of the obvious things is just learn it early. So get that, beat it into the kids from the earliest days. Second part of it is about reward. So if the hand washing experience is a pleasant one, it's much more likely, as my student Gabby has shown, that it's much more likely that those habits become automated. And if there's, and the opposite is true as well, it's like
You can't afford to be disgusted.
So we live in this sterile world where we've got toilet, we never have to face anything disgusting. We start to get hypersensitive about things that might make us sick in our environment. Particularly, I think in America, you have one of the most sterile environments in the world. But if you're living in a place where you're in a favela and the streets are running with wastewater and mud and there's human feces everywhere, you have to learn to live with it. But I think our fight is to create a world that isn't like that, because nobody likes that. Nobody would choose to live in a world full of contamination and infection. And nobody has to. We know what to do now. So, if in the 21st century we've achieved so much. I think the Millennium Development Goals have to be about zero tolerance now for poor sanitation, for poor environmental health, zero tolerance for poor hygiene. I think everybody should be living in conditions where they can get rid of disgusting stuff out of their lives, and if they can, then we'll achieve universal good health as well.
So is hygiene an important issue in the post-2015 International Development Agenda?
It's always been hard to get hygiene onto the agenda. I mean, one of the problems is, a toilet, it's a thing. Water is something you can see. Behaviour is something ephemeral. It disappears. It's gone. And so it's hard to talk about behaviour. It's hard to measure hygiene behaviour. But yet, in fact, all of the benefits that we get from all of these technologies are from behaviour. So we should be looking at behaviour, studying behaviour, finding better ways of measuring behaviour. And I think then it'll be much easier for us to get goals that people can buy into. But there's no question hygiene is probably the most cost-effective intervention there is for improving health in the world today. And for it not to be part of the Millennium Development Goals is a massive missed opportunity, and I think a bit of a scandal, frankly.
All right, well, thank you, Valerie, for taking the time to talk with us today.
Real pleasure, thank you.